I mean, it's pretty obvious to anybody from the animal activist community. Like, this is not. It's not about biosecurity. This is an industry that doesn't like the publicity they're getting. They don't obviously. They don't like it being shown what happens behind the closed doors of modern farms or slaughterhouses. It's not good for business if people can see what's actually happening. And so this is an attempt to put an end to that. I guess before COVID-19 was being taken seriously in outside of Wuhan, China, like here in Canada and in Ontario, a lot of your listeners probably are familiar with Bill 156. And so this is an ag bill in Ontario being proposed that would make it illegal to do undercover investigations like what I was doing. And they're also proposing that criminally charging individuals who trespass and document animal cruelty or conditions on farms, and charging these people in a way that's much more severe than something like trespass would be treated in any other context. And the industry's primary justification for this is concerns about biosecurity. When I was doing investigations, I was thinking basically almost exclusively about like animal cruelty and neglect. I wasn't looking at it through the lens of biosecurity.
What is meant by biosecurity?
So the concern would be that if, say, somebody goes onto a farm, maybe they're carrying some kind of disease that another animal could contract, or maybe there'd be some kind of cross-contamination between barns on a farm, say, something like that. If they're really concerned about biosecurity as an issue, I'd say, like, why aren't they taking biosecurity concerns seriously? That when I worked on farms, like when I worked on the dairy farm, they have, like, people you drive, just like you show up for work, that you drive onto the farm. You're not having the tires of your vehicle disinfected. Well, you're not even disinfecting anything. And that's not somebody coming from their house or from the city. Like, they have people who work there who lived on and or worked at other dairy farms. Mm. If they're concerned about cross-contamination, they should be concerned about people who are actually coming from other farms. They should, like, I don't know why they'd be concerned about people who don't live on farms, like animal rights activists who obviously aren't living on or working at farms. They should be concerned about people coming from actual farms, potentially bringing other diseases and spreading them, but they're not. They had people show up in their street clothes, people who, even just friends of people who work there, who would just show up unannounced. This was known to owners and supervisors, and they took no corrective action and seemed largely unconcerned. On farms, they have just the practices. Like, they give on a dairy farm, they inject cows with oxytocin, which it makes them let the milk down more. They'll release the milk if you give them this injection. These cows are sharing needles. Like, this would be obscene if this was ever done in a hospital. Like, it just wouldn't happen. Like, even somebody. This is why we have safe injection sites for people who have drug addiction, disease to be spread. And so you're just creating the perfect environment for disease to be spread. Never mind, and the place is filthy. There's, I don't know how much, like, if a cow produces many times more excrement than a human can, but obviously they're not using toilets and and they're living in their own excrement. In the chicken slaughterhouse, like you mean you're hanging sick and injured birds. Like, you're not supposed to, like any slaughterhouse, you're not supposed to kill or slaughter an animal for human consumption if they're sick. But I mean, I was instructed to hang sick and injured birds on the slaughter line, and like, they have different ways of. They have at the chicken slaughterhouse. They have two ways of stunning the animal, and one is controlled atmospheric stunning. So it's like, so they put the chickens in CO2 chambers until they pass out, until they're unconscious. They suffocate until they're unconscious. And so the animals that arrive dead, you'd have no way of knowing which ones. You could be hanging dead animals. You'd have no way of knowing if they were. You're hanging a dead or a live animal, an animal that was sick and died, had disease. You'd have no way of knowing. And these birds are coming, they're being trucked in through all kinds of weather extremes. If it's the middle of the summer, the chickens that are on the inside of the truck, furthest from the outside, they have the least amount of ventilation and they die from heat exhaustion. In the winter, it's the chickens on the outside of the truck, and they die from exposure to cold. They freeze to death. Sometimes, like an entire truckload of chickens came, they were just frozen solid. If it's like minus 30 outside, and they were outside for too long, they didn't just die. They died, and their bodies were frozen solid as if they had been in a freezer, or however long it takes to freeze a chicken's corpse. And the ones that haven't died, I mean, there's lots that are just barely alive. You can't tell. Like, those ones, the ones that aren't coming through the CO2 chambers, if those are dead, then you can tell that they're dead. But then there's the ones that are almost dead, but they're still, like, they might blink. You can tell, like, they're not completely dead. So those ones get hung up. You don't know if they're sick or if they're just one among many that are dying from weather exposure. I'm not even talking about this as an animal cruelty issue, which it obviously is, but just from a health perspective, the spread of disease. Even if you don't care about animal suffering at all, like, this is a health crisis. On egg farms, like, obviously you're driving to and from the farm. No tires are being cleaned, disinfected. Actually, on the egg farm, they had this for some of the barns, like shower in, shower out policies. So you shower as you enter the barn, and then you shower as you exit, to supposedly prevent any cross-contamination between barns on the farm. While at the same time, they are cleaning the barns with, like, this motorized plow. The plow isn't being cleaned, sterilized, disinfected. It's covered in chicken excrement from the previous barns. Like, what's the point of having a shower before going in, or say, even if maybe you dip your boots in like some kind of disinfectant bath to prevent you from carrying something in from another barn? What's the point if you're taking driving another machine into the barns, into where the chickens are, covered in excrement from the previous barn and the previous barn and the previous barn? It makes no sense. It would seem to me that the biosecurity precautions that they take, they're for show, and not for being actually effective. Like when I was working as a chicken catcher, sometimes they had you wear biosecurity suits, sometimes not. When you did wear it, when they did give you biosecurity suits to wear, sometimes you wear that same suit from one farm to the next. So, and they want people who are documenting animal cruelty to be charged criminally because of the risk that they pose, these people are posing to biosecurity. Why doesn't the bill say anything about the biosecurity risks that the industry poses to itself on a daily basis? It's pretty obvious that the concern, like by far, the biggest biosecurity threat to the industry is the industry itself. It doesn't even come close to what an activist could do. Yet the bill says nothing about criminal charges for someone on the industry committing far more egregious acts, breaches of biosecurity.
Yeah, I don't know anybody who goes and works on a local organic plant farm that has to be concerned about biosecurity and having showers before they go into their garden and work with their plants in their backyard, or, you know, unless you're spraying animal feces, I guess, as fertilizer. That sometimes happens, right? Sometimes if we hear about a crop of spinach that has E. coli or something from California, well, that's not from the spinach, that's from the excrement from the local farms, right? So I'm wondering a few things. First of all, I totally get it. Like that these diseases are not being brought onto the farm. The diseases are coming out of the farms because of these horrific conditions. And who's overseeing this? Like, are there inspections? There was one, I think it was the dairy farm that you worked on that you were able to expose, where then the SPCA got involved after the fact, after you revealed what was going on, and there was a criminal investigation and stuff like that. But aside from, if we didn't have this kind of footage from Mercy for Animals and other organizations like that, you know, who's watching? Who's watching what's going on here and exposing it?
I mean, that's the disturbing thing. Really, like, nobody, a lot of people don't understand that, like, there is no government oversight on farms. Like, if you talk to a farmer or anybody from the industry, they'll say, oh yes, we have codes of practice and rules, and they'll say we have inspections, and it's true. But what they won't say is that it was the industry that developed their own code of practice, and it was like that they inspect themselves. And I mean, if that's not conflict of interest enough, like when I was working at farms, or even in the slaughterhouse, although there is a food inspection agency who is supposed to be monitoring the slaughterhouse. Anyways, every single inspection done was announced in advance. I would be given instructions to clean up the area, to place the dead animals out of sight. But even if, say, like, so any inspection is not representative of what the industry actually looks like. But even if they do see something that they would deem as horrible, who's going to find out about that? They're not, the egg producers of Canada is not going to knock on CBC's door and say, hey CBC, we got a news story for you. Come see how terrible we are. It's not going to happen.
Right, and they know they're doing something wrong if they have to ask you to clean up because the inspection's coming.
Yeah, and even the codes of practice are so weak. Like the codes of practice, if you ever read any of like the codes of practice for whatever industry, whether it's pigs or eggs or dairy or beef or whatever happens to be, it's always they're recommendations. So like, it's not like you have to do this or you have to do that. There are areas that actually there are areas that do say are classified as requirements, but even there the language is so vague. So it might say if don't submit any animals to any undue suffering or something like that. It's like, well, what constitutes undue suffering, or don't don't leave an animal, an injured animal, languishing for too long. Like, how long is too long? Is an
Right,
hour
and then if
too
they,
long?
right, and then so they issue this statement saying, okay, these are the recommendations, then does anybody follow up to see if the recommendations are being put into place?
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't, even if you're doing an inspection, like you would, like say you see an animal that's a lame pig on a hog farm, say, um, and the requirement is to not to leave that animal suffering for too long. How would you know if you just show up? Like, you'd have to be there for I don't know, say a week, and to see that continue, that animal just, that you'd have to see that neglect, and then you'd have to try and prove, convince, and I'll say a judge, that a week, that's too long, that's too much undue suffering, even though it's not defined anywhere. uh it's the the pitiful uh requirements that they have. I mean, they're not properly enforced, well, really enforced at all. But even if they were, it's just so pitiful. Like, anybody who cares about uh, animal suffering would be appalled. Farm. Now, every farm, every slaughterhouse I worked at, you sign an employee contract, and it says no filming, no photos, no cameras. If you're caught, if you take any pictures, you're fired. You lose your job. And legally, they can do that. They can make that an employee requirement. You can't get in like legal trouble for that. They can just legally fire you for that. But the last farm, the last investigation I did, which was an egg farm, it said that, just like every other place did. But it also said, if it's discovered that, say, you're filming for the purposes of exposing animal cruelty, not only do you get fired, but you withdraw your legal right to, like, to personal privacy. So like, so your information, like your social insurance number, your name, your birthday, like all this information, it said you withdraw the right to having your information kept private, in order that we can distribute your information throughout the industry to prevent you from infiltrating other farms and other slaughterhouses.
Again, I have to wonder if they're not doing anything wrong, why don't they want us to see it?
Like, you would think that if there's an animal cruelty problem on farms, shouldn't the response be, shouldn't the industry response be to, let's eliminate the cruelty, let's change the way we operate. That's not the response. The response is to try and, instead of fixing the problem, let's hide the problem.